All right, what is your background in composition?
My background in composition is that I started as a teaching assistant in 1983 at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana, and I was a master's student, and I was given a class each semester to teach, and then we also had some instruction in pedagogy so that we wouldn't be completely out of our depth when we went into the classroom. So I did that for a year, and then I stayed at Ball State as a contingent faculty or lecturer for another maybe year and a half. Mm-hmm. And then I went to Indianapolis and was doing the adjunct lecturer circuit and learned a lot, especially when I was working for Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis, IUPUI as it's called. Yeah, so I had a rich background right kind of out of the gate in terms of teaching at a number of institutions and just teaching in the first year writing courses that they offered. Right. Ball State focused on modes of writing, which had to do with, comparison contrast, just definition papers, process analysis, cause and effect, and that sort of thing. So it was a little bit artificial in retrospect. I didn't realize that at the time, but yeah, looking back, I realized that was a bit too constraining, I think, for what some students are able to do, obviously, in the first year writing class.
And you teach holistically. Can you expand more on that?
Yeah, I teach holistically now, or at least, transitioning out of the Ball State modes way of teaching first-year composition, I moved into an environment in which the instruction was portfolio-based, and so assessment actually didn't occur until the very end of the semester when the student would turn in a portfolio of work, with an emphasis on revising all the way. So we had a rubric that we would use to assess the entire portfolio, and students knew that they were working toward that, but it was a very, open to change along the way without, I think the advantage of that kind of approach is that a lot of times if a student gets a C in an early assignment, that C has a tendency to plague the student and the teacher. I mean, quite honestly, as you look back and you think, well, they got a C on that first assignment, so how could they be so much better than that, or what's happening here with their writing? It was a kind of got us off the hook sort of thing to grade like that. Now my practice continues to be somewhat holistic, but not in that radically portfolio-based assessment kind of way, whereas now I look at that whole essay, I link up assignment parameters, like what those objectives are, and then overlay that with those high-order concerns, low-order concerns that take the whole essay into consideration and don't put too much focus on any one feature. Because some students can do really well with organization, but their development is not there yet, and so those two high-order concerns need to be considered kind of as a joined kind of thing, like something that the student can work out and work through in with a bigger perspective on the whole essay.
And
absolutely, yeah. Now, the thing with revision is that sometimes I'm always straddling the line, it feels like, between being too suggestive, like you could consider this, and not just coming out and saying, I want you to do this. So it's the question of giving the student ownership on the writing and saying, it's your paper, you're the boss of your paper, I think you should do this, but that's not the only way that you could improve it. And so we do peer review and try to get another set of eyes on that, and I encourage students to go to the Writing Center and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a great question. Group? And actually, I was thinking about Hibbard 307 and the problem with the teacher barrier in that classroom. So Hibbard is a pod, clusters of computers, and that pretty much constrains how students are seated while they're working on their drafts and so forth. But one advantage of that classroom is that those chairs can scoot around on casters, and students can, change their seating and pair up with someone that they're peer reviewing with or something like that. It's important to me to take that into consideration. So like that barrier, if I want to come out from behind the podium, it's a big production. I have to walk past two 6-foot tables that are pushed together, and there are times when I pull those two tables apart so I don't have to go all the way around like that, and they're always pushed back together again the next time so I just forget to keep doing it. But I think, the configuration of classroom seating is super important, because the computer lab where we're having our 315, 515 classes, you're kind of limited in terms of visibility even. Whereas in the active learning classroom, you've got these pods, and everybody's sitting around looking at everybody else, and they have their computer screen here, and they can all be working on that computer screen and still looking at each other. I like that in theory. In practice, it's a little tricky sometimes. But yeah, rows are just deadening. I mean, who wants to sit and look at the back of someone's head?
They're very boring.
Student writers struggle with trying to really grasp the need and the importance of starting early, so they tend to delay starting, and that's why it's important to build in little, practice things that then can add up to the essay. Like, for example, this morning they've got a draft due next week, and we were writing sections very deliberately using language of rhetorical analysis. So here's a sentence, use that, and then plug your example into it. And then they walk out of the classroom and they've actually got something, that they've written. And then it can build from there. So getting them started earlier, helping them to realize the value of models and the possibilities that they can learn stylistic techniques from more experienced, more practiced writers, helping them develop vocabulary that is so needed, because they think sophisticated thoughts, but they don't have the working vocabulary and their writing ability to take it to that next level. So those are some of the issues that they deal with. It's almost more of a cultural thing. Like, for example, at Purdue, when I was a teaching assistant there was a scholar in the department, James Berlin, who had died early, in his 40s or so, from a heart attack, and it was just this freak thing that, he was suddenly gone, but he had left a legacy of some of his writings on cultural studies approaches to teaching, first-year writing, and a lot of what we did at Purdue in our first-year writing courses had to do with looking at issues of race, gender, class, sexuality, trying to unearth those ideologies that everybody seems to take for granted that we don't even question. And so that was kind of the Berlin legacy at Purdue. So I've read a lot of composition theory. Actually, what happened for me was I started to get more into the technical writing and Society for Technical Communication kind of scholarship, where you're looking at workplace writing and how it works. So I think my more recent exposure to scholarship takes me in that direction, where I'm starting to think more about workplace writing, which actually reflects on or is reflected in my practice in teaching first-year writing, because I say to them, here's a set of skills that you're using that you'll be using in the workplace if you do any kind of writing at all. So I try to bring that back to composition teaching for the first-year students, even though it's more technical, more advanced stuff. Oh, for stylistics, oh gosh. There are so many writers whose work I admire. Toni Morrison springs to mind immediately. It kind of depends on who I'm reading at the time. Right now, I'm plowing through the works of David Foster Wallace, and I don't necessarily aspire to write like that, but he just blows me away with the way he describes things. And so, but I hardly ever read fiction. I mean, most of my reading is in natural history or science and technology studies or something like that. Donna Haraway, I mean, stylistically, you would think, how does she write like that? And then you meet her and you find out she talks like that too. So she must think like that. She just lives and breathes that kind of playfulness with language that makes it so engaging to read.
Mm.